Hey everybody, welcome to the Fire Up with CJ show. Today I have Ellen Tad here and we're talking about her book, The Infinite View, a guidebook for life on Earth. What a great line. And honestly, I love a lot of the things in this book because there are practical things that we can do day to day. They're kind of perceptual things that we can hold the world in a different frame. And then there are things that we can do like every quarter. There's all sorts of different ideas that are in this book. So welcome, Ellen. I can't wait to talk to you about this book.
Thank you. It's great to be with you.
So I wanted to talk about some of the big picture items that are in this book. The first, which, I remember when my husband and I were first on our spiritual journey, we said, well, what's the difference between a spirit and a soul and our personality? What is the difference? And I love the description that you gave in this book. So I was wondering if you could touch upon that as we start off.
Yes. So, my spiritual guides have been my teachers, and these are their definitions, but I've found them to be extraordinarily helpful. So the spirit is a spark of the God force that exists in all of us. And the spirit is the only constant. Every aspect of ourself is evolving and changing except our spiritual essence. This is our core. And every spirit has an individual emphasis. So one person may emphasize creativity, another nurturing, another wisdom. Whatever our particular spiritual emphasis is, it doesn't change. It goes from one life to the next and from one dimension to the next. And so this is you can even think of it as our enlightened self within us. And then over the spirit is the soul. And some people use these words interchangeably, but I make a distinction. The soul is the container of the spirit that allows the spirit to have individuality and animation. And the soul, different from the spirit, is very complicated. It contains all of our past life patterns, traumas, talents, skills, fears that have accumulated through all of the many lives we've lived. So the soul is evolving. And in the soul, there's a concept that I call first error, or the original attitude that was not in harmony with our spiritual nature. I also call it the beginning of the karmic snowball. So another way of thinking about this is that we all started out with an enlightenment, which simply means we were able to manifest our spiritual nature with consistency, and then we lost that. We had misconceptions, original fears. In Christianity, they have the term original sin, but I have found from my own visions and what I've learned is that our fears are not identical. Our confusions are not identical. So we have different fundamental first errors. And so this resides in the soul. So we're working on healing the soul and evolving the soul. And then over the soul is our personality, our persona in the world, which is influenced by genetics, conditioning from parents, society, and education. This is where typical psychology ends. They focus on environment and genetics. And then I add past life influences and then influence from the spiritual essence. And what I've been taught is that fulfillment is when our spiritual essence manifests at our personality level.
Okay, what is that? Can you kind of give me I don't have a clear sense of what that means.
So let's say, I can give you an example of a client. So this is a person who grew up in a very high achieving family and felt pressured to be successful in the world. But this person's spiritual nature is creativity. And when this person decided to move in the direction of creativity with art and with writing and different aspects of creativity, she was much more happy because she was following her inner nature instead of society's prescription of what success should be for her.
I see. So that's actually if you allow your spiritual, in her sense, you said there are a whole bunch of themes that you have. Everyone has their own spiritual theme. Maybe hers was creativity. So when she became aligned with that you call it a spark, I can't remember what you called it.
Yes.
Yeah, that
Essence.
her spiritual essence, when she aligned with her spiritual essence, then she was just happier. Her person,
Yeah.
yes. Okay, got it. Okay, got it.
For someone else, it might be nurturing.
Hmm.
And so when they're in some role where that nurturing side of their nature gets to be expressed, then they feel fulfilled. So the real challenge is when society says that a certain way of being is success without taking into consideration who the individual is, then it can be like being a round peg trying to fit into a square hole, and it doesn't feel satisfying.
And what are examples? And I've seen a lot of different structures and conceptual frameworks to describe, like Akashic Records has, no, not the Michael Teachings has a whole framework that's also a body of channeled work. And it has a very similar kind of thing where you have a set spiritual essence is your term. They have a different term for it, but you have a spiritual essence, and then you actually have layered on top of that like a specific soul that lives lifetime after lifetime. I'm not sure exactly, but it has a very similar kind of feel to it. For yours, in the Michael Teachings, there's like a set number of, I think it's like 7 or 10 of spiritual essence. Based on your experience channeling for other people, is there a set of spiritual essences, or is it like as complex as a human being?
Well, the analogy I use in my book is ice cream flavors. You can have vanilla with chocolate swirls. You can have vanilla with strawberry swirls. So you can have someone who has a creative essence, and yet that creative essence in one person is much more akin to sound and vibration, where another person is much more connected to color and form. So they're variations that are really quite infinite. So I tend not to put them in these categories. I do see certain archetypes. I've never counted them, but I see variations on themes all the time.
Give us a sense of the archetype so that the listeners can relate and go, "Oh, that's me," or it's like, what are some examples of spiritual essence?
Okay, well, the first was creativity. Wisdom is another one. Power, nurturing, devotion, expressiveness, love, linked to fundamental spiritual principles.
Compassion, truth, freedom,
Yes.
like anything that's kind of a higher level conceptual spiritual concept is something that you would relate to. And how does
Yes.
one discover what their since it's something that is enduring, how does one discover what their spiritual essence is?
Well, you can do it through meditation, but also in my book, I write about the relationship between fear and desire. And I was taught that what we most fear is not getting what we most desire. And I have found that people can discover their spiritual essence by getting in touch with their deepest desire, because at our core level, our deepest desire is linked to actualizing our spiritual essence.
Okay.
So for one person, the deepest desire may be to be loved. And then it's likely that their spiritual essence is about love. Or someone may have a desire to actualize their potential. And that may be linked to being creative. Or someone may have a desire to not make mistakes because of a fear of ignorance, which mean that their spiritual essence is linked to wisdom. So in my book, I talk about people being able to learn about their spiritual essence and their first error by looking at the relationship between their deepest fears and their deepest desires. So what we most fear is linked to our first error.
Ah, okay, got it. So if I were, I'm actually trying to figure out how this applies. Like if I were to map this based on my understanding of me, some of my highest values, I think of them as values. As a coach, we translate everything into values. And so freedom, love, truth, adventure, those are the things that are my core values, things that I care about, meaning. Those are the key things that I care about the most. And so, could
So
that be?
what's your deepest desire? If you go, we have many desires, but if you go to your deepest, and I call it the lowest common denominator desire, what do you most desire?
Probably freedom is probably the first and foremost, is my educated guess. Don't know.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so your spiritual emphasis feels like it is about that, about freedom. So then is your deepest fear feeling trapped or not free?
Yes. No, actually, what I say is my deepest fear is lack of control. So,
Okay.
yeah, that would be
So
my greatest fear.
wouldn't you see that there's an opposite side of the coin there, that to be free and then to not have control? So the so in order to, this is what I found to be a universal formula. In order to find freedom, you have to work through the fear of not having control.
Yes, agreed. Yeah, that seems to be my thematic thing that I've been working on in many different forms and factions. So the first error, to going back to your model, then my first error would be as a result of doing something where I lost control. And my greatest desire is to have freedom. And if I
Yes.
think about all the past life work that I've done, it pretty much fits within that
You
model.
see a theme, and what you
Yeah.
see with past lives is a theme of first errors and spiritual nature run through all of them,
Mm-hmm.
because it's the root lesson and the root essence. And I can give myself as an example. My
Mm-hmm.
spiritual essence is wisdom.
Mm.
My deepest fear is around ignorance and the
Mm.
realization of ignorance, because in my wisdom, I see that ignorance has far reaching ramification. So
Mm.
what I've had to heal is the fear of mistakes and the ramification of those mistakes that can cause suffering, and to affirm. So what I've said to myself for years, our mistakes are good. They're necessary for learning and growing,
Mm-hmm.
so that I no longer feel afraid of ignorance or the ignorance of others. You see, in some ways, I'm the
Mm-hmm.
ignorance of others, because I can learn from my ignorance if I apply myself, but I can't control whether other people learn from their ignorance. And so recognizing, as my guides taught me, ignorance is imperfection also. It is necessary in the process of learning. The,
Interesting.
the more that I embrace learning, the more I actualize wisdom.
Right.
That's
Interesting.
my little formula. So what I found is everyone's a little different, but what's universal is the relationship between fear and desire and spiritual essence and first errors.
Fascinating. And so I could see, there are almost things that I hear yours, like your pep talk, your self talk. It's like, you don't have to have it perfect. You can, those are the kinds of things that you say to yourself. And my stuff is like surrender, let go. You don't have, just those are the kinds of things that you develop. And what I really liked in your book is you have a whole set of like, statements. Like I'm trying to go back to the statements in here. What lesson is for me in this situation? What should I do? What is the loving thing to do? I am spirit. Everyone is spirit. So much like my personal mantra may be, let go, surrender to God. God has a better plan. Those are the kinds of things that I rumble around in my head. When do
And I
you?
am spirit, therefore I am free.
I am spirit, therefore I'm free. Oh. That's nice too. Um, how do these statements work in for the what lesson is there for me in this situation? What should I do? What these statements, because I've noticed that the what lesson is for me in this situation, what should I do? I see that as kind of a statement that you use throughout as kind of a general purpose way for you to kind of snap into a certain perspective. When do you use this statement, and is it in the context of first error or generally?
Well, I have a chapter on attunement.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, attunement is aligning our conscious mind with our spirit.
Mm-hmm.
And so attunement is situational.
Mm-hmm.
Every situation calls for a different response. And so it's not so much good, bad, right, wrong thinking as much as situational awareness. So when a situation transpires, what I've been taught is to accept what is,
Mm-hmm.
because when we don't have acceptance, we go into turmoil and reaction. Accept what is, and then ask, given what is, what am I to do?
Mm-hmm.
And what is the lesson for me in this situation? And so I teach tools for decision making, for clarity of perception, because our perception informs our feelings, and our feelings inform our actions. So having clarity of perception is key. So it's also the recognition that life on earth is our school,
Mm-hmm.
and we come here to learn and to evolve as well as enjoy and contribute.
Mm-hmm.
And so from that perspective, things that transpire have reasons and have purpose. And by having this inner dialogue, we become conscious of what that is.
So let me give an example, because I was just dialoguing with someone about the election, and I don't want to get political, but actually what we were talking about is pretty neutral. We were discussing how things have radically changed for both parties, Republican and Democrat. So for Republicans, they've changed for the better because finally Obama's gone and there's a whole set of things that were bad and demonic and whatever about Obama. And with Trump, it's, oh gosh, Trump is here. And now there's a whole set of like judgments and prescribed feelings about Trump. So regardless of what side you sit on, it seems like people have actually had like a wake up call or a place for celebration, depending on who you are. And so for me, I would say, so what lesson is it for me in this situation? So what should I do? What is a loving thing to do? Is that so it's kind of shaken, for me, it's kind of shaken me into going, wow, I was a little bit in a bubble and I had no idea what a bubble I was in, thinking that in Seattle where things are thriving, technology is reigns supreme, that there are people in this country that are suffering and where they don't have jobs, they don't have a livelihood, they've been suffering and have been unheard. So for me, I think, well, what lesson is that? Like, I guess even when you feel like you're in truth, there's a part of you that's ignorant. I mean, for me, I actually just see that there is just a huge, gross sense of ignorance. And what should I do is to get clear about how can I become less ignorant, like to understand the full picture and what got me in that place to begin with. Is that how you would use this? I mean, how does one attune to, because what you said is it's your conscious mind attuning to spirit. Is that right? These phrases?
Well, what you're talking about makes me want to talk about having observed people's chakras. I spent actually a couple decades just watching people's chakras. I didn't read books on them. I just watched them because I'm interested in human behavior. And I wanted to understand, why do people do what they do? What motivates them? And so what I've observed is that most people live their life focused in the gut. And we're what I call, and the gut is in the chakra system, the solar plexus. And so I think of our country as a solar plexus dominant culture. And to me, this is a problem because I've concluded in my observation of chakras is that when people focus in the gut, and I know it's a popular notion, but I'd like to dispel it. When people are focused in the gut, the tendency is to be too self-centered. And this is also the center of harmony. So when we're focused in the gut, we're happy when things are going well for us, and unhappy when things are not going well for us. And this is the center of emotion. And so when things are not going well and we're living in the gut, people are sad or mad or hurt. And there's a tendency to be reactionary. And this center is also responsible for overeating, drug abuse. It's all linked to the turmoil of the solar plexus. And so what I found when I observed people is people were either solar plexus dominant or their analytical mind was dominant so thinking or feeling. But there's a third option, which is the third eye chakra in the middle of the forehead. And this center is the center of wisdom. And wisdom is very different than the intellect. Wisdom is the ability to see the far-reaching impact. And so I have found that our perceptions inform our feelings. And how we perceive informs our feelings, which informs our actions. So I'm trying to encourage people to move to the third eye. So what I see when I look at our political system that I want to influence is I want to move people out of the solar plexus, because when we vote from the perspective of only our own lives, we're missing out on interconnection and we're missing out on the big picture. Because the decisions that happen because of our political system are not just about us. They're about our earth. They're about our future generations. And so we need wisdom rather than our own particular circumstance to help us make decisions, because the decisions are far reaching. So I really want to encourage people to strengthen focus and concentration. This is the center. The third eye is the center of focus and concentration. It's just like athletes who go into the zone. When they go into the zone, they perform their actual best. And this zone essentially is deep activation of the third eye chakra.
Okay, so in your book, you talk about how to activate the third eye chakra and to see through this third eye and from this place of wisdom versus emotionality or just thought alone. So how does one do that? You talk about literally focusing on your third eye. And then you had something interesting that I read in not in that chapter, but in another chapter where you talk about looking at through the side. You wake up in the morning. I think I got this right. You wake up in the morning and you look out from the corner of your eyes. And I thought, I don't get it. What? So tell me a little bit how it all fits together.
And I look at the corner of a picture frame.
A corner of a picture frame. And what's that for?
So what activates the third eye is focus and concentration alone. Nothing else does.
Okay.
Only focus and concentration.
Okay.
But it doesn't matter what we focus on. We can focus on the corner of a picture frame. We can focus on getting a ball in a hole. And when we're playing golf, we can focus on a note when we're playing an instrument. It doesn't matter. Or we can just look out of the middle of our forehead, because any aspect of focus and concentration will bring us to the third eye.
Okay.
It's really, you can think of it this way, it's one-pointedness. When we have one-pointedness, we go into a oneness consciousness. In the midst of that oneness consciousness, we go into spiritual principles. We get wiser. We get more compassionate. We make better decisions because of it. We're not reactionary because we feel our own wholeness. Essentially, it's a oneness perspective that comes from literally focusing on a point.
Okay, so you're driving along on the road and you're driving in traffic. I mean, are you looking at traffic through your regular two eyes and also this third eye? Like, what happens in your day-to-day life? Okay, so you're kind of looking at...
So my motto is, when you open two eyes, open three. And it's like a posture. Just imagine slouching versus sitting up straight. So it's a posture of looking out of your forehead and your physical eyes at the same time. And you can train yourself to do it. And I've trained a lot of people. And it's amazing because you can go from being annoyed to not being annoyed. You can go from feeling rushed to not feeling rushed. You can go from being confused to having the clarity of the next step. When my daughter was in high school and she was having a hard time, I lit a candle and I said to her, stare at the candle flame. And while you're staring at the candle flame, ask yourself the questions you want clarity about. And when she did that, she became a wise sage.
Okay.
And so it's very simple, but it's very effective.
Yeah, so I thought, okay, I'm going to try this because I read it in your book, and so I thought I'm going to try seeing. So I was preparing the questions for this interview, and I literally thought, okay, because I said I was a little bit rushed, so I was reading this book late last night, and then I was writing questions on the cover, and then I thought, well, I only have 30 minutes before the show. I have to write up these questions in some coherent form, and I just kept on focusing on my third eye while I was writing. So and I think actually probably a lot of my life happens there anyways, but I'm not sure. But when I did it, so this morning, my son, who's grounded, he has a special circumstance where at school they're getting together for an event. And he said, can I go to this event, even though I'm grounded, at 5? And I wanted to say, as a parent, there's all sorts of well, what about the rules? He's grounded, but then it's logical because he's going directly from work there. And why would I have him come all the way home? Then he'll be rushed. All these kind of thoughts are and I was like, okay, try this third eye thing. And I just sat there and I focused on my third and I'm like, yes, you can go. And that was it.
Yeah, exactly.
And I have no idea. I don't know if there was a right answer, but I can tell you that just focusing here and answering from that spot, it did calm down the emotionality that got associated with the event. Oh my gosh, what happens? He's on curfew. That doesn't seem fair. All the kind of dialogue that went along just kind of got edited out. And I just tuned in. I was like, no, or yes. It was a yes or no answer, not this long thought process.
That's right. Clarity. And so, I've been doing this for 30 years. And I've taught large numbers of people, and I was raised by a scientist. And so to me, as I apply these tools, to me, my life is a laboratory, and I'm always pragmatic and I'm interested in what works. And I can tell you it works. And I have great stories for my life and my students' lives. Because the third eye gives us this long-term result. So what's most important for your son is you want him to grow into a fulfilled adult.
Right.
And so all the choices that you make for him are choices that are going to support that process of moving him to being an independent, fulfilled, productive, loving adult. And so the third eye is going to attune to the specific moment what will support that. And it doesn't get caught in rules. And that's the thing about attunement. There are no rules. There's situational awareness. It's is it wrong to lie? Well, no, not if you're hiding Jewish people in the attic and they're Nazis at the door. It's not, then it's right to lie. So the point is that the third eye is one very important tool for attunement. And I always tell people, don't believe me, just try it, see how it goes. And I've seen over and over for me that it works.
Yeah, I'm beginning to do it just to see what happens. It's not particularly hard to do. You just have to, it's a perspective shift where you're just imagining seeing through your two eyes and a third eye in this particular direction. I don't know how hard it is to do. I'm sure it will be times where I'll lose it and I'll have to go back. So one of the things that you see in a lot of in spiritual books, so in the Eastern practices, a lot of the Kung Fu and those kind of things, they talk about orienting your life in the Jianjian, which is this kind of gut area. And then there's some that are like, oh, you should navigate the world through your heart. And then you're talking about mind. So these are the different, at least the three most common that I've heard. You mentioned two of them already. And then you mentioned in your book, the heart. And so the question is I know that you talked about the third eye as being the one that's kind of the wise, spiritual, conceptual, long-term thinking part of you, which can kind of integrate all of these. But when is it appropriate to tap into your gut, to tap into your heart, and to use these in conjunction with your third eye or alone independently?
So in my clairvoyant observation, I've concluded that each chakra or energy center in the etheric body has its appropriate use. And think of it very much like anatomy and physiology. You know, the heart has the heart's job and the lungs have the lungs' job. And each chakra has a different job. And every one of them is equally important, but it's important that they're used properly. And so I have found that each center can be dominant or diminished or healthy. So when I work with people who follow their heart, I see a lot of confusion because, as my guide, one of my guides who's been my teacher says, the heart is a radiator, not a discriminator. And so the analogy I'm given is the heart is more like the sun. And you want it to be opened and you want it to radiate. You want to express love and receive love. But the third eye guides the appropriateness of the expression of love. I've known many, many people who love and the relationships don't go well, or they get hurt or disappointed, because loving is really doing that which supports the growth process of others. And it takes the combination of the third eye and the heart together to discern that.
So give me an example, maybe recently for you, in which you're actually combining the wisdom of the heart and the intelligence of the heart with the wisdom of your third eye.
Well, I live in Boston, and there are a lot of people on the street. And just today I was walking through the garden, and I was feeling love for everyone that I walked by. But it wasn't appropriate for me to talk with them or to stop them or to have a personal relationship with them. But I was recognizing that each person is spirit. And in that sense of unity and in the recognition of their essential beauty, I was feeling love for everyone. Now, when I feel love for someone doesn't mean that I should act on it. So my third eye informs my heart. How do I express this love and what's appropriate and what isn't? And I think that you can love someone and really have no personal relationship with them.
So it's opening. It's not as if you're closing the heart. It's opening your heart, but at the same time having what I heard in that example, perhaps, is like a partnership between these two centers, so that you get the intelligence of the heart, which is, everyone. I'm spirit. Everyone is spirit, and everyone is beautiful, and I'm in love with the world, right? So that's kind of like a felt heart experience, and then it's kind of okay. Well, that's true, and that's highly intelligent. And that's wonderful. And then what is it that you're going to do as you're walking around the Boston Common?
Or think about loving a child who wants candy for dinner.
Right.
and you say no, and they throw a temper tantrum.
Right.
And, and in your heart, you stay loving, and in your third eye, you stay clear that what they need is a balanced diet, and their temper tantrum doesn't throw you off one bit.
So I had one yesterday where I would say my gut feeling. There's in the college forums in which my son got in. There's a parent forum in which they offer like information about like moving in, when did the kids move in, blah blah blah. And one was I thought a parent saying like, this is what you should do. You should celebrate spring, and you should actually go and be excited for your kids and going to the prom, and you should let go. It's kind of all these like shoulds and prescriptions. And so given my greatest desire, freedom, it's like, what are you telling me what I should do? Who are you anyways? Like some parent telling me what to do? And so I was about to like send off a flame mail. So I started writing the flame mail that said, I really do appreciate this forum. And I know that what you're coming from a place of love when you're writing this. I really do have a sense that you're trying to come from a place of love and advice and wisdom. And for me, the languaging of what I should and should not do is really I was going to say irritating, and then I'd erase it and say frustrating. Then I erased it and said not hurtful.
Yes.
Yes. And then I looked at it and thank God something came in, and I said to my husband, "Can you read this?" And he's like, "What good is going to come of that?" I'm like, "None." I said, "Perhaps maybe she's offending other people." And he said, "Let me read the article." And he's like, "I don't think it's that bad." And I said, and I looked and I was like, okay. But it felt good to just like write it out, like get all my angry feelings out so my emotions could come out. Like, what was it that was irritating me about, like, I would read the post and I would get triggered. And I thought, well, that's actually, and going back to what you're saying, what lesson is it for me in this situation, right? She should also have the freedom to talk about, doing this to me. Like, that's her prerogative. What's my issue with that?
I think what was annoying was that she was making broad sweeping generalizations.
Yeah.
And my guides are quite clear that broad sweeping generalizations create blocks, are not helpful. Mm-hmm. And they always tell me to consider what is universal and what is unique. What's universal is not that every parent who sends their child to college should sort of let go and just let them be, because some children need a lot of parenting after they're in college and need a lot of close communication and real involvement. Others are ready to jump out of the nest and fly, because it's so individual depending on the child and the circumstance and the school. And so when you have someone who's projecting their experience on everyone, it isn't wise. and so you were reacting from your solar plexus because of your issue around freedom and not wanting someone to project their issues on you.
Exactly.
But from the third eye, what you see objectively is she's projecting her issues on you, which is not wise, but you don't have to react to it.
Right. And that's exactly where I arrived. But it was interesting because I think going back to some of the things that you mentioned in your book as the cautionary, and just for folks who are like, what was that book again? It's The Infinite View, a guidebook for life on Earth. So by Ellen Tad, who we're talking to. And so what you're saying in your book is that, the reason why it's not appropriate necessarily to do as Americans do, which is just to react and decide based on our gut, is because there's a lot of emotional content / baggage / toxicity / confused first error stuff in there. That's what I'm picking up.
And what I see is this sense of one reaction ricocheting off another. So let's say this woman is reacting by projecting her situation on other people, and then you react to her projecting onto you, and then she's going to react to your reacting to her, and then you just keep having reactions.
Right.
And so, this is very, very common in our world where people are all reacting to each other. And at some point, it's just terribly depleting, and it doesn't foster the actualization of our best self or a better world. So the third eye gives us a compassion and objectivity and a greater distance that allows us actually to stay more engaged.
So I'm going to be trying it because logically it makes more sense to me to actually use this part because for all the reasons that you talked about before. Because much like you, in your second chakra or first or second chakra, wherever that is, you're going to have like emotions that cloud your judgment. In your heart, you're going to have, like you said, it's a beacon that wants to send love to everyone, even when it's inappropriate sometimes, or not even in your best interest.
Or you can radiate love, but you may, what is loving? It has an infinite number of expressions depending on what the circumstance is, and how are you going to discern it?
Right.
The third eye is that center of discernment. And so the gut is the center of emotion. But if we live in the gut, the analogy I use, it's like walking down the street with your eyes closed, feeling your way. It's much more confusing, much more dangerous.
But you see it alone, like that's how people do, like they do navigate in that particular way. I do oftentimes, and I'm going to try. And it's funny that this book, The Infinite View, came to me because I was just talking to someone and I said, really what I want to do is when I'm coaching, I'm in this space, the third eye, and kind of listening, logically, synthesizing information, feeling things with my body empathetically, and then offering ideas, questions. And I'm not thinking about the questions that I'm going to ask. They come from a very intuitive place, and and it's really just out of the best interest of that person. And a lot of the things that you mentioned, I see, like when I'm coaching someone, I see their beauty sometimes before they even see their beauty. And I have to hold that essence that I see stronger than they can even capable of them seeing. And I have to keep on reminding them of that. And that's where I want to be. And what I said yesterday is like, I want to be in that place all the time because it's a good place to be.
Yeah, and it feels good to be alive in that place.
Yeah, it does. And I think the third eye is something that I can see really helping. And the other piece that I and I'm just trying to dispel a lot, because there's so many ways of navigating the world. There's so many spiritual books out there. A lot talk about, and I've met with all sorts of woo-woo people throughout the whole spectrum. And some of them say, open up your chakras, and some people say close your chakras except for your head and your first chakra and your crown chakra and your first chakra. Do you have any thoughts on this?
I wrote another book. It's called The Wisdom of the Chakras, Tools for Navigating the Complexity of Life, which is just a little book based on my conclusions of 20 years of observation. And, if you Google the word chakras, you come up with 500 different books that are out there. And I always wonder, where did they get their information? Because I think there's a lot of confusion. And so what I was interested when I observed was, how do they function in everyday life? How do our words, our thoughts, our feelings, our actions affect these centers? What makes them healthy? What makes them unhealthy? And I found that, that after observing, I really understand it. So any questions you have about those chakras, what to me is most important is having each one function as it's properly, as it's meant to be, given what it is, and to have them all working together. Because,
and should they all be open? Should some be open or closed? Or like, what is this open close thing about?
Okay, so as I said, each chakra can become dominant or diminished or healthy.
Okay.
You don't want them to be too big. You don't want them to be too closed. You want them to be just right.
Okay.
So in other words, so I've had a client whose crown chakra is too big. So what that means is she's incredibly enthusiastic, she's incredibly inspired, but she doesn't actualize all this inspiration. So she ends up being impractical, doesn't manage money well, has trouble with the details. So the crown chakra, when it's open too much, can actually be dangerous. It's like a child who goes home with a stranger. It's trust without discrimination and trust without discipline.
Mm.
So, and I had another client whose heart was huge. Well, her pattern was to be incredibly generous and then get her feelings hurt.
Mm.
And incredibly generous, and because she wanted to stay open, and then she'd get her feelings hurt. As each of these people learned to integrate the third chakra, the third eye chakra, with all the other chakras, the crown became a proper proportion, the heart became a proper proportion. So there could be love with discernment, trust with discernment. So all the centers have to work together. It's one system.
Interesting. Okay, that's super helpful. Yeah, I get that. Okay, that is super, super helpful. I love that. Okay, all right, rushing and rhythm. I wanted to talk about that too, because nowadays modern life is so much about rushing and
Yes.
and not being in rhythm. And I don't know if you're constantly in this calm, centered place, which I see on your face. It's just so beautiful. Are you constantly in there, or are there sometimes and you're like, where are my keys? Where are my keys? Like, what?
Well, I always say I'm a teacher and a student.
Okay.
I feel that my guides have been my teachers, and I work to implement their teaching at the same time I teach their teaching. And I also always say that my work is my hobby and my life is my work, because it's easier to teach than it is to live.
Right.
And so, the way it works is you get it, you lose it, you reinstate it. You get it, you lose it, you reinstate it. And that's a constant process. So I'm comfortable with that process now. It doesn't make me feel bad about myself when I lose it. I just accept that's the way learning happens, through repetition. So, sometimes we're in easy phases. And when we're in easy phases, it can be so much easier to be balanced and to be focused. And then we get challenging times. And then in those challenging times, it's kind of like, leaving the plateau and having to climb up the mountain again, So I've had phases where I feel like, it's not so hard to actualize these different things that I've learned, and other times where I'm really working it. So
what is the rushed in rhythm for you? What does it look like, and how do you move from rushing to rhythm?
So this actually deals with the identity chakra in the chakra system, which is the center of balance. It's in the midpoint between the ovaries in a woman and a comparable spot in a man. So what I've learned is that balance means not pushing and not holding back, but rather, one of my favorite affirmations about this is I'm able to act and I'm able to wait. So it's a feeling of flow instead of push or holding back. So I can actually feel it in my body that when I'm rushing, I feel as if I'm ahead of myself.
Yeah, like it's for me, it looks like this. Like literally, if you see me, my head is leading the whole thing.
Yes,
I see.
And even if you're driving in the car, you still feel that yourself is in front of you. You're pushing. And holding back, let's say you're in an auditorium and you want to ask a question, but you don't, and you hold back, it's like your energy's behind you. So you can start paying attention, because to me, stress is when we're pushing or when we're holding back. Either way, it feels stressful. And when we're not doing either, that's when we move into the feeling of flow. And so this process of monitoring ourselves through self-observation and making an adjustment is really key. And what I found is culturally, rushing is extremely common, and therefore stress is extremely common. And we tend to have the attitude, I don't have enough time. And that's where I talked about that experience I had where I was told I had from now until eternity. And what's interesting is with an attitude change, you can be effective in rhythm. So rhythm can be slow or fast, but rhythm feels very different than pushing. Rhythm has a pace to it that's fluid. And so I like to experiment. I have an extraordinarily busy time now. I'm promoting a book. And so I start catching myself rushing, and I pause and I try to get into rhythm. which is a feeling of moving along without push.
Okay, so you say to yourself, the audible compact of it is, I have eternity. Is that what you say? And then,
Well, that was an experience I had many years ago. I have from now until eternity.
I have
In
now
other
until
words,
eternity.
I have enough time.
Right.
I have enough time to do that which is attuned. So the
Hmm.
combination of the third eye plus the identity chakra, which has to do with timing, um, this sense of I'm going to take one step at a time and
Mm.
let go of what I can't do today and focus on it tomorrow. But some periods in our lives are more challenging than others. I'm in a challenging period right now because I have a lot I'm trying to accomplish. So I'm working this lesson a lot, and it's a combination of third eye focus plus not pushing ahead or holding back, but just staying steady in this
Mm.
step at a time approach.
So this has been fantastic. We've been talking to Ellen Tadd, the author of this book, The Infinite View, a guidebook for life on Earth. What incredible, incredible tips. I've just loved them, and it couldn't have been more appropriate at this point. Thank you so much.
My pleasure.
We're back. We have a little special segment here where we're talking. I had so many questions, and Ellen has generously agreed to answer some of these additional questions post show. So, you have a couple of things that I just thought were lovely, and I want to try out, but there's almost such a long list of things to try out. But I want to talk to listeners about these fantastic tools. One is something in the evening, staying current, and tell me a little bit about how that works in practice for you. So, in the
Yeah.
evening, like this evening, what are you going to be doing about today and staying current?
Well, we haven't talked very much about the fact that I developed relationships with guides in the spiritual world. But
Hmm.
early on, when they started to teach me, they suggested that I review my day at the end of my day.
Hmm.
And so at the end of my day, I would meditate and review my day. And they wanted me to observe myself to see when I was attuned and when I wasn't attuned, to see when I was out of balance and to see I was in balance. And they wanted me to correct my day. So
Hmm.
if I looked at my day from the third eye, how would I correct it if I could do it differently?
Hmm.
And so I found that I could do that process fairly quickly, where I could correct my day. Maybe I found myself talking too much, or maybe I found myself being a poor listener, um, or maybe I said something that I regretted saying. And so I would correct my day.
And
And
how does it mean to correct your day? Do you mean like your third eye would say, if you were to do this again, here's what I would suggest, or what would it look like when you
if I
correct
had
yourself?
been in my third eye, this is how I would have been.
Ah, okay.
And and then I actually visualize myself doing it differently.
Oh,
And,
okay.
and I would go through my day. But what that taught me, and I actually did it every night for years. I don't do that every night
Hmm.
anymore. So maybe I should do it some more. But um, but what it taught me was it taught me to catch myself in the moment. So when I found myself saying something that I was going to regret later, I would observe myself. I started having an imaginary me over my shoulder watching me. And so instead of correcting my day at the end of the day, I started correcting myself in the moment. I believe that our weaknesses are our greatest teachers. And when we pay attention to our weaknesses and we correct them, then we learn and we change.
Hmm.
And too often, I think people feel badly about themselves when they make mistakes, and in that way avoid looking at their mistakes or their weaknesses, and then they don't evolve and change as quickly.
Hmm.
So this review process is really helpful.
Hmm.
I've done it with a number of students, and they find sometimes at first it's hard to look. They don't like looking at their mistakes or their foolishness. But after a while, they get over it and start correcting it, and then they really make changes in their behavior.
Mm. Okay, the another one that you talk about is In the morning, you talk about activating your third eye, which I think we talked about during a show. And that is to just, so it's really just about focusing your attention in the morning on a point. And is that what kind of the focus and the discipline to focus on one thing, is that what activates your third eye?
Yeah, so it's right in the middle of the forehead, not between the brows, but
Right.
right in the middle, a little bit higher.
Oh,
Little
here.
higher. Yes,
Oh,
right. No, little lower. Yes.
okay.
It's a higher than some people think. It's right
Okay.
smack in the middle of the forehead. So if you think of your brows and your hairline, it's right in the middle.
Okay, got it. So it'd be right there.
Exactly.
Okay, got it.
So, yes. So even during the day, let's say I find myself reactionary or discouraged, I will grab a point and get to my third eye. So, looking at a point, or if I'm on the telephone, I may grab a point. If I have to make a decision, I may grab a point. And that is like third eye calisthenics.
Okay, so the grabbing a point is like, I mean, I could even touch this point, and that would be
That's right.
grabbing a point. It's like
Yes,
focusing your mind on the third eye or anything, right? Or is it
that's
focusing
right.
on, okay, it could be anything, just the
Sometimes,
focus.
sometimes I tell people put a little spit there just so they know where they're aiming.
Yeah, that's a good idea. Okay, so that's one. And then the other thing that you talk about is seeing things through new eyes. And I was trying that today, and it was quite lovely. I thought, I've done this run forever, but I'm just going to do this run as if I've never done this run before. And that was really lovely, where you actually approach it from a brand new pair of eyes. So when you've done
Yes.
that, or you continue to do that, what are things that come up for you by initiating that process?
Well, the exercise is affirming newness. And the affirmation that I teach for that is I am filled with newness. I see anew. So when I use that affirmation, many things happen. I often feel more appreciation for what I have or what my circumstance is. I also see more clearly what I need to accomplish.
Hmm.
Um, like if someone feels discouraged about their house being chaotic, when they affirm that they're filled with newness, they get to it and they organize. So it can clarify what the priorities are. At the same time, it can deepen appreciation.
Interesting. So I didn't see it that way. But what I just heard you say was kind of a new way of looking at it. It's like when I reboot my computer, like it gets too full, and like just reboot it, and then half of the problems that happened with your computer will just be gone. So it's
It's
the
a good
same.
analogy.
Yeah, it seems like the same thing. And then you have this idea of a substance word, which is a theme that you would have during a what day, a week, or a month. How did you use the substance word in your practice?
So in my classes, I teach people to ask and listen. So meditation becomes an interactive process.
Hmm.
So when I'm teaching people to ask and listen, which also is a way of learning to access connection with one's guides or ask and listen to one's inner spirit, I ask people to ask and listen for a substance word to be given to them.
Hmm.
And that substance word will be their teacher, will be their guru for the week. And so I don't want them to think about a word. I want them to ask and listen. So I want them to experience the difference between coming to a decision through analysis versus asking and listening.
Hmm.
And an example of that was a woman in class who thought to herself, I know my word's going to be patience because I need patience. But when she went into meditation and she asked for a word to come to her and she listened, her word was harmony.
Hmm.
And she found that when she focused on harmony, she felt patient.
Hmm.
So the word that came to her was more effective than the word she thought would be her word.
It's funny because I did this after reading. I thought, well, what's my word? And my word was understanding, which I would not have. There's a whole bunch of goals that I have going on right now, but that would not have been the theme. But is that
Yes.
so? Do you think that is like your spirit guides telling you, hey, this is, I don't know what you're thinking about, but this is what we suggest that you focus on,
Well, so
understanding?
then you want to go into meditation if you have a concern and ask understanding. for insight.
Hmm.
Now, when I teach this class in the series of classes that I teach, I'm not being so concerned whether the answer is coming from a guide, whether the answer comes from oneness, whether the answer comes from the spirit. This is a more introductory lesson in just asking and listening. But then as the class progresses, I then become a stickler about where is the information coming from and teaching people to differentiate between when answers come from guides, when answers come from the inner spirit, when answers come from a oneness source.
And why do you think that's important? Because I've talked to some spiritual people that says it doesn't matter. Why do you care? Just, you know.
I think it does, because what I see, I don't even use the word intuition because I think it's too general. I'm very interested. I was raised by a scientist. I'm very interested in detail. I'm very interested in accuracy and being specific. And what I find with a lot of people who are talking about intuition is they're not necessarily accurate enough for me. And so I'm interested in really differentiating accuracy from inaccuracy and really feeling confident. So when I know where the information's coming from, when I understand how to read the difference, it refines my sensitivity so I'm able to differentiate accuracy more clearly.
Okay, so let's say that it comes from oneness, or it comes from a spirit guide, or it comes from, I don't know what the third category, I can't remember what the
The
third
spirit
category.
within.
The what?
The spirit within.
Okay, the spirit
Your inner
within.
spirit.
Okay, so in those three of those areas, so let's say that understanding came from oneness. Then what does that? What would I do with that once I
Okay,
understood?
so let me tell you what the differences are.
Okay.
So when we connect to the oneness, it's very powerful. So healers often connect to the oneness because this is a force that contains every aspect of life. So it's very powerful. And having that kind of connection gives you access to bliss and to the feeling of oneness, and that can be very healing. When we get answers from this oneness source, they tend to be general. They're universal, they're based in spiritual principles, they're very expansive.
Mm-hmm.
However, when we get connection with guides, because they're individuals who are kind of like airplanes flying 1,000 miles above the ground, they can see the twists and turns in our life. The answers can be very detailed, very specific. Like, my guide telling me where my son was going to go to college, The oneness is not going to tell me where my son is going to college. It doesn't function that way. So the guides are able to converse in a much more detailed way. But when we connect with them, it's not going to have the same power, the same bliss, the same energy in being a healer, so it serves a different purpose. Then the spirit within is our particular individual essence. And I've been taught by my guides that no matter what your experience is, take it into your own spirit for final confirmation, because this is respecting that this is your life and you get to make the final decision.
Okay, got it. So, and when I heard the word understanding, when I said, what is my substance word, I heard understanding. I mean, my intuitive sense is it comes from a place of oneness. But no, let's say that I didn't know where it was coming from. Let's say understanding, it could be that it's a oneness, a spiritual concept, right? Which would mean I'm here to learn a lesson at this point about understanding. So all of these things fall on the rubric of understanding because it's a spiritual lesson to learn. Versus if it came from a guide, it would be like, you need to understand your son better and what he's going through. So it's like, if it came from a guide, it's very tactical, specific to something that's happening.
So what I would say to you is, where did it come from? So direction is important. So if it came from your inner spirit, it would come from deep within you. If it came from a guide, it would be like over your shoulder, over your head. If it comes from the oneness, it feels like it's in the air all around you.
It feels like it's right around here. It doesn't feel like it feels right around here. Yeah. Okay. Versus like a guide that comes like this, and then the oneness, it feels like a deep, like inside of you. Yeah, it feels like a
So
one.
when it comes to you, when it comes from you, and one is all around you.
Yeah, it feels more all around me than it is.
I agree.
Okay, got it. So
Yes.
that's basically how you tell. And I can see how depending on what you hear and where it comes from, it would associate with different actions, right? If it's an understanding of my son, that would be one path. If it came from let's say I heard it from here, which is a guide, then it would spawn off a whole different set of behaviors and actions than if it came from like oneness and an understanding versus
Yes,
internally.
but let's say you go into meditation and you ask understanding
Hmm.
for some specific insight into your son.
Hmm.
That may open you up to your guide so that he can give you the specific understanding. Or let's say you go into meditation and you ask understanding for something and you feel the answer come from here. So that what it does as an exercise is begin the process of asking and listening in its multifaceted ways.
I see. Okay, so you're kind of listening for the different pair of ears, and you're listening in a different way if it comes here, if it comes here, or if it comes in here.
In this particular exercise, as I said, I wasn't so concerned with where it came from as much as people listening to the accuracy of the
Right,
answer.
right. Got it. Okay, got it. So, uh, how have you seen? So this is more of a personal question because you said you've been traveling this path for 30 years. I mean, and you have a series of students that you take through classes. I mean, what's the typical progression, or is there a typical progression that one goes through in using these processes, tools, different ways of interacting? What have you seen happens over a duration of time, either for yourself or your students?
Well, I have a beginning course that I've taught for 30 years, and it's a very set course. It's identical every time. And it really was orchestrated by my guides. I didn't plan it. They planned it.
Mm-hmm.
And the first class is spirit, learning to meditate, learning to see the spirit in ourselves and others. Every class has a homework at the end.
Mm-hmm.
Second class is the human condition, learning to understand the challenges of the human condition. And, my guides have a phrase, which is what we focus on is what we see.
Mm-hmm.
And when we're taught as children to focus a certain way, that's how we start to see as a culture.
Mm-hmm.
And so a very much of the emphasis in my class is to recondition people away from cultural conditioning to perceive life from a spiritual human perspective.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's meditation as a tool to experience a lot of the different tools, and it progresses with a very clear direction, which is spirit, human, developing positivity,
Right.
so that
So it follows the chapters in your book.
yes, so it's not identical
Right.
with that, but it's very similar. The difference is that I've woven more of my narrative into this book
Mm-hmm.
because I wanted people to understand more of how it developed for me.
Mm-hmm.
But yes, the beginning course is very much in this book, except that I didn't focus on how to connect with one's own guide so much.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't focus in depth on the chakra system because I have a different book that focuses on that.
Right. This has been so fantastic. Thank you for staying another 20 minutes to talk about this because I wanted to cover everything because I have these questions myself. Tell us how to get to your website to buy the book and learn more about you.
Well, my website is ellentadd, TADD.com.
Mm-hmm.
And the book is fortunately published by Penguin Random House, so it's available where books are sold.
Okay.
And can be gotten online or in bookstores.
Thank you so much. This is fabulous. And
My
thank
pleasure.
you for staying later too.
It means so much to me that you're listening to the show. Would love your support in any way by giving me comments below or to subscribe to the show or share the show with friends. Thank you again for your support. Love and blessings.